Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday. Well, this is the Monday on which we pretend that it is July 17th, 2023. Welcome back to the show. We're, of course, away from the microphone this week and on vacation, enjoying ourselves in what is promising to be the sweltering heat of the Bahamas. What are we doing going to the Bahamas in the summer? I wish I could tell you it was like some sort of research trip or something. I guess it is. We're learning. It's a learning experience. I'll tell you that. Anyway, today is the day that we pretend, I pretend, on Friday, July 14th, Bastille Day, that it is Monday, July 17th, and we roll forward from there. But today, one of our specials, our vacation specials, the 1 hour show that I was able to record for you ahead of time. It was a great opportunity to clear out the vaults, and they're still jam-packed, by the way, to the rafters with stories that we haven't gotten to. But the latest round of current-ish stories that I haven't had a chance to get to, or things that I just think need to be put on the record. Some fresh stuff, some stuff that's not old. But anyway, let's get right to it. I've got a great couple of stories for you. We're going to just jump straight into the first one. And yeah, the length of the show, it's going to be a little wonky this week, Justice, but we'll learn to live with it. And Justice keeps emphasizing to me that it really doesn't matter what the length of the show actually is anyway, so I'm not going to knock myself out doing it like this anymore. Let's roll my own tape. Take it away, me, I guess. Take me away. How about that? Well, here's a fascinating story that I've been holding on to for quite some time. Never really had the good opportunity to squeeze it into a show before now, but something we ought to bring up and talk about a little bit. A Washington Post piece from way, way back on July 4th, by Drew Harwell, who writes, a viral left-wing Twitter account may have been fake all along. And I recognize this account. I didn't follow it. I always thought there was something weird about it. Not that it was fake, but just, well, actually, I got the feeling that the news that it was reporting was, if not fake, then certainly more sensational than it really deserved to be. But there are a lot of such accounts on Twitter and elsewhere. Anyway, the Erica Marsh account, it says here, shows how rage baiting remains a powerful way to win attention and score political points. So what's going on here? The piece is illustrated with a progression of photos that I guess were grabbed from the Twitter account, supposedly, I guess, selfies of Erica Marsh, which are labeled here possibly manipulated photos. The video, the caption says, produced by John Scott Relton. Is it Relton or Ralton? Yeah, Relton. A researcher at Citizen Lab shows that photos shared by the Erica Marsh account show remarkable similarities. Well, I mean, they're photos of the same person, of course, but I guess it looks like the idea here is that it might just have been one or two photos manipulated in ways to make it look like there was a slightly different angle or slightly different lighting. Anyway, I don't know. We'll read about it. In 8 months, it says, Erica Marsh has become one of the most consistently viral left-wing voices on Twitter, gaining more than 130,000 followers for her hyper-liberal, often melodramatic, there you go, opinions of the biggest flashpoints in American news. She's been especially popular with conservatives, who promoted her as a perfect symbol of how overly theatrical and inane liberals can be. Like when she attacked the Supreme Court's affirmative action decision last week by saying, quote, no black person will be able to succeed in a merit-based system. That tweet was viewed more than 27 million times, and you can see why. That is interesting bait for the right in many ways. Actually, that's the only thing it could possibly be. But anyway, there's just one problem. She's probably a fake. Let's hear more. The quote-unquote proud Democrat in Washington, as she described herself on Twitter, doesn't show up in any local phone or voting records. The Biden presidential campaign, where she said she worked as a field organizer, has no record of her. Neither does the Obama Foundation, where she claimed to have volunteered. Her only other known social media profile on TikTok posts copies of her tweets, but has never included her speaking or showing her face. And a digital imaging expert said that the 3 purported selfies she's posted on Twitter showing a young, smiling blonde woman bear the hallmarks of digital manipulation. And, not easily at hand here, but certainly digital manipulation, or the very threat of it, should, there we go, prompt some dramatic music, I think. So what's going on here? It's this. I strongly suspect that this person doesn't exist, says John Scott Railton, that senior researcher, before named as the producer of the video, a researcher at the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto who studies online disinformation. It's as if she dropped from the moon and arrived fully formed with this narrative that makes liberals look like idiots. Okay. Maybe that's why I wasn't following. After the Washington Post raised questions about the account with employees of Twitter's Trust and Safety Department, I guess there still was one at the time, the account was suspended on Sunday, back a week or so ago, for unknown reasons. Twitter does not officially respond to requests for comment. Marsh's account, which did not respond to requests for comment, has not tweeted since. Months after the Elon Musk takeover, months after Elon Musk took over Twitter, or the takeover of Twitter by Elon Musk, which is somehow how I wanted to read it, with a scorched earth playbook to eradicate scammers and spam, the internet's long-established playbook for winning online engagement, known as attention farming, remains decisively in play. Marsh's account tended to post messages so polarizing and incendiary that readers couldn't help but respond, boosting her public profile in the process, a tactic known as rage baiting. So I guess that's what that is. The strategy was most infamously deployed by trolls linked to the Russian government to stir up angst and chaos during the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign, but it is also a common tool for domestic tricksters and opportunists seeking to ridicule their political opponents or just benefit from the attention of a big engaged follower base. For months, Marsh's account had raised suspicions among online misinformation experts due to her lack of a real-world footprint and her devotion to attention-grabbing viewpoints, one called cartoonishly liberal. Her account carried a verified blue check mark, an icon that once connoted that the person's identity had been confirmed by Twitter, but since Elon Musk's takeover last year has come to mean only that the account has paid for the designation. She waved off doubters by saying repeatedly that she was not a parody, a fake person, or a robot, but tweeted once that she wished she were because it would make navigating Twitter a lot easier. Okay. She declined to share details about herself by saying she had a terrifying stalker from social media, adding, "I've learned from my mistakes in the past and choose not to share much of my personal life." Last week, as people questioned her legitimacy, she asked her Twitter followers to recommend a defamation attorney to her. When it came to political commentary, she seemed to regard every polarizing news story as an opportunity to offer her opinion and to solicit her fans to promote her to their own networks. She started her account in September of 2022, shortly before Musk's takeover, with a rapid-fire series of left-leaning tweets and requests for people to retweet if they agreed. It worked. In November and December, she was gaining more than 1,000 followers a day, according to audience data from the social media analytics firm Social Blade. They'll have the worst names for their social media analytics firms out there. And the piece is then illustrated with 3 possibly manipulated photos. They are labeled as such. And, I couldn't tell you why, but perhaps the story will enlighten us a little bit later. It's unclear where the account's photos came from, but, oh good, we're getting right to it. Scott Railton suspects they may be stock images, selfies taken from a woman not connected to the account, or images that were otherwise altered, perhaps to combine multiple photos into one. Each had a different background, though the facial features remained largely the same. Some of her tweets were copied word for word from other big left-wing accounts or trending tweets, while others sometimes read like liberal caricatures. Last month, she said she still wears 2 masks whenever I go out and support Ukraine. Okay. On Twitter, she became a subject of heavy doubt and fascination, with some theorizing that she was a right-wing agitator or a foreign actor, or that she was designed to collect as much data about Democratic voters as possible for God knows what. Amateur online sleuths noted that her name matched a character on the TV show One Tree Hill. I do not know that show, and said they'd found one of her profile photos on a German marketing website. That last part could not be confirmed. The assertion she was phony, however, became just another way to build an audience. MAGA just told me that my proud Democrat followers are bots, she tweeted last year. Let's prove him wrong. Where are my allies at? Her most extreme and mean-spirited tweets, including her glee over the death of a January 6th rioter, were often used by conservatives to criticize the Biden administration based on her assertion that she'd been involved with his campaign. Her tweet about the affirmative action decision, in which she said black people would not succeed in a merit-based system, sparked a viral outcry of its own. One tweet, in which a correspondent for a news outlet covering U.S. Africa policy tweeted that a former Biden organizer had offered the craziest and most disrespectful argument he had ever read, has been viewed nearly 4 million times. Marsh later defended her tweet, saying it had been manipulated for propaganda and misinformation by Ultra-MAGA. The Today News Africa correspondent, Simon Ateba, defended his tweet in an email to the Post. There was no reason to doubt the authenticity of her Twitter account until it was suspended on Sunday, he wrote. It is natural for us to assume that the information people provide on their profiles is true. A former Twitter trust and safety employee who investigated accounts for impersonation and authentication, who left the company earlier this year after Musk's takeover and spoke on condition of anonymity due to fear of harassment, said the company had seen a rush of accounts out of North Macedonia around October of 2022, posing as pro-Trump influencers and offering up the same style of over-the-top clickbait tweets. Troll farms from the Republican Eastern Europe have, in recent years, run sensationalist websites and taken over Facebook pages in hopes of pulling in ad money from angry readers in the U.S., regardless of their political leanings. It's unclear whether Marsh's account was part of that kind of campaign, the former Twitter employee said, but it shares many of the characteristics of the network of fake political accounts created during the run-up to the 2022 midterms. The accounts were often run from foreign countries and opined on divisive current events while posing as politically active Americans. They tended to use profile pictures taken from around the internet to create a persona that seemed relatable or engaging. Young women, teachers, and veterans. And they used exaggerated political stances to stir up controversy, draw readers' ire, and build an audience, either to score political points or monetize the account, maybe by changing its name and content in the months to come. For some months, the Erica Marsh account profile included a link to a Venmo account, which would have allowed readers to send her money. Venmo didn't respond immediately to a request for comment. You can go a long way with a reasonably consistent one-dimensional identity online if it has certain features. Smart strategies for posting content, an attractive profile picture, a degree of spice and sassiness, Scott Railton said. Our online discourse is deeply vulnerable to this kind of character. So, that wraps it up. That's the entirety of the piece. It is rather remarkable. I definitely did come across this profile at some point. And it did strike me as over the top, but I guess I didn't pay that much attention to it. I just said, all right, well, just not interesting to me, and moved on. But it did pop up quite a bit. Of course, I didn't remain at Twitter all that long while this account was still active anyway. But Perhaps you've seen it, and if by any chance you ever thought the same thing, now you can feel vindicated. And if by some chance you followed the account and perhaps rolled your eyes at it a couple of times but never bothered to cut it off and stop following, well, now it's suspended, so you don't have to. So the job's been taken care of. But otherwise, you can go and purge it from your follows list if you're even still at the bird site. Anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting. Just wanted to bring it to light. Well reported. I really would like to know more about how they can figure out that photos have been manipulated, though. And maybe that's just too technical and boring a subject for anyone to dive into in a general reporting piece like this one. But one of these days, maybe we'll get around to reading something about that, and maybe we'll share it right here on the air. Well, next up, I just have to say thank God for Rosalyn MacGregor, because it's going to be Rosalyn MacGregor week here on the Kagro in the Morning show. And she's bailing us out by having provided, I think, a whopping, well, I have a backlog here, 5 pieces, 5 from Rosalyn. Not all at once, and one of them is backlogged, but then she not only is there 5, but one of them is a real whopper at the end of the week. And I'm doubling up 2 Rosalyn MacGregor segments today, 2 in the next show that we have for you, and then 1, the big whopper, coming up on Friday. Anyway, let's just get right to it because I'm already running along with today's show. Let's get to it. Take it away, Rosalyn.
Good morning, David. Today I'd like to bring you news of more intra-party fighting in the Michigan Republican Party. MLive brings us this report written by Simon Schuster. Michigan Republican Party Chair Kristina Karamo harshly rebuked the campaign arm of her party in the Michigan House. She called it horrific that the House Republican Campaign Committee named former Governor Rick Snyder and donor Bill Parfet, a former president of Upjohn, now known as Pfizer, and a past director of several recognizable large companies, to lead the caucus's fundraising efforts. Karamo said in an interview it was disturbing that these are the folks that they want to lean on to take back the House, because both Snyder and Parfet, relatively moderate conservatives, had notably broken with their party in the recent past. Snyder in 2020 publicly endorsed then Democratic nominee Joe Biden in the presidential election, calling then President Donald Trump, quote, a bully who lacks a moral compass. In 2022, Parfet joined a coalition called Republicans for Whitmer to support Governor Gretchen Whitmer's re-election. In a statement, Parfet said Whitmer has, quote, a proven track record of compromise, understands the issue, and, like us, is committed to a great future, unquote. Karamo said the party had been fielding, quote, a lot of very angry calls, unquote, about it. Quote, how do you think the average Republican voter feels that they have a group of Republicans leaning on a guy who endorsed Joe Biden, a guy who endorsed Gretchen Whitmer to help them in their efforts, Karamo said. Republican voters are very upset. The House Republican Campaign Committee declined to respond to Karamo's statements. Karamo said correcting ill-advised ideological inclusivity is why she's leading the Michigan Republicans today. Quote, people are tired of the squishy, wishy-washy Republicans, she said. They're just not dealing with it anymore, unquote. Karamo said Biden is destroying our country while Whitmer is relying on the Chinese Communist Party to help rebuild our economy. As Chair Karamo has appeared at government meetings to decry a $2.4 billion battery plant being planned outside Big Rapids because Goshen, the company receiving taxpayer incentives for the project, has Chinese ownership. After the Republican gubernatorial nominee Tudor Dixon lost to Whitmer by nearly 11 percentage points last November, the party's prior leadership laid blame at the feet of their top candidates for rhetoric and views that led to an exodus of the party's largest donors. Quote, you can have all the money in the world. If the voters aren't going to turn out for your candidates, it won't mean a hill of beans, end quote, Karamo said. Karamo led a wave of hardline America First delegates to win control of the party a few months later and has claimed a mandate to reclaim the party for true Republicans. She said, quote, people are excited to see a change where you'll have a Republican Party that actually honors the will of the base and especially with the populist movement, unquote. Jason Rowe, a Republican consultant and one-time executive director of the Michigan Republican Party, rebutted Karamo's argument, saying fundraising in the party is at a historic low, and I don't know how we can tell Republicans that maybe aren't the most conservative that they're not welcome. Quote, if we're going to broaden the party, we should broaden it with people that can help in the cause of getting the state house majority back, Rowe said. Governor Snyder and Bill Parfet have been very significant leaders on some of the most conservative reforms in Michigan in recent years, particularly right to work. They've been very successful fundraisers and Republicans could use their help, end quote. Democrats are in full control of state government for the first time in 40 years, but thanks to a quirk of the state constitution that requires some Republican votes in the legislature to ensure the budget is enacted by October 1st when the new fiscal year begins. It allows Republican leaders to bake some of their own priorities into the budget through negotiations, but if Republicans can't get what they're after at the bargaining table, Karamo thinks legislative Republicans should absolutely be willing to shut down state government to force Democrats' hands. That's my time. I'm your Michigan correspondent signing off. Back to you, David.
Thanks, Rosalyn. Hey, don't go anywhere. We're going to need you back here in a minute or two. Well, as you know, I always appreciate a good story from Amanda Marcotte. I sometimes appreciate a bad story from Amanda Marcotte. If you can find them, let me know. But this one here in Salon is interesting for yet another reason. You'd think she worked here at this point, but what can I tell you? I guess she's got the same sort of eye for the same sort of stories as we do, and I just find myself ending up on her salon stories all the time. This one here for a very different reason, but one that is a big part of what we do here at the show. From, what's the date? July 10th, an interview, and she pointed out on, I don't know, Mastodon, I guess, when I saw this thing, this is a different kind of a piece for her. Instead of an opinion piece, this is a reported interview piece. And here's the deal. The headline, enclosed in quotes here for some reason up at the top, gun violence has created a lot of anxiety, unquote, and then colon, the forgotten survivors of shootings speak. This is the subheader, which tells us journalist Lauren Kleinman talks about the forgotten victims of gun violence and their visible and invisible wounds. So a different sort of piece for her, but very much in keeping with the way we frequently discuss gun violence here. Every once in a while, just sort of pointing out the rote statements that local reporters often make after a shooting of one kind or another, and saying, just sort of a matter-of-factly stating that those who were not killed in the attack but injured are the victim is expected to survive or expected to make a full recovery. Even worse, sort of expected to, like, we all require this of you. We expect you to do this, so just go do it. And very often, particularly these days with the assault rifles in circulation, making a full recovery is not anything like what ends up happening. It's just that they're not dead. And sometimes it's not even that, really. Sometimes people with these really horrific wounds that assault weapons can sometimes cause die of those wounds years later. And then it's not said that they were killed by the attack necessarily, but that's exactly what happened. And they do make some mention of this, I believe, in this article. So let's get to it here. Over the extended 4th of July holiday, so this is a great time for this kind of reporting, as has become all too normal in the U.S., there was a numbing series of, I didn't even count this many, 16 mass shootings in 13 states and Washington, D.C. Random people were chased down in Philadelphia by a shooter seemingly inspired by Donald Trump. I don't think I even got around to hearing that. People were gunned down at an Independence Day festival in Fort Worth, Texas. 30 people were hit with bullets in Baltimore at a neighborhood party, and another 11 people were shot at a block party in Shreveport, Louisiana. The bloodshed just went on, leaving at least 15 people dead and nearly 100 more injured. The damage from mass shootings is truly overwhelming. The press efforts to package the trauma in small enough bites for their audience to understand, however, has led to an unfortunate tendency giving focus solely to those who die. I mean, I think there are also other ill effects, like just splitting them up into bite-sized chunks here and pretending that, well, at least for the case, as is the case with accidental shootings, that it's not some sort of nationwide problem. It's just a localized thing, a freak accident that happens somewhere. And even though it happens to 3 toddlers a week, no one ever seems to be interested in making these connections. But we'll focus on these connections of survivors of gun violence for the time being. That's what the story is about. So, as we said, headlines often only include the death count. Victim lists tend to be those who perished. It's understandable to focus mainly on the worst outcomes, but in reality, mass shootings have exponentially more victims than those who died. The casualties include the injured, traumatized, and bereaved. The ripples of pain are ceaseless. In the new book, The Forgotten Survivors of Gun Violence, Wounded, there's a colon, wounded, editors Lauren Kleinman, Siobhan Scott, and Sandy Phillips. Oh, I'm sorry, one more, and Lonnie Phillips. Sandy and Phillips and Lonnie Phillips. I don't know if they're related or not. It's listed that way. Sandy Phillips and Lonnie Phillips put the focus back on those who survive but are forever changed. Kleinman spoke with Salon about the book and the need to keep not just the fallen, but the wounded in the conversation about gun violence. So, an editorial note that the interview was edited for clarity and length. But here's the gist of it. The question or opening, proposition here. This book is especially pertinent right now with the shootings that happened over the holiday. Many of them got minor attention because most victims survived, and that's just how jaded we are now. Tell me more about the book. The answer here, Wounded, is a short collection. It's about 20 personal essays written by survivors of both visible and invisible wounds. Invisible wounds meaning things like PTSD related to gun violence. Visible wounds such as getting shot in a limb or ending up in a wheelchair. Of course, many people have both. And Amanda then follows up saying, I follow the subject of shootings, especially mass shootings, very closely. And one thing that does drive me a little nuts about the media coverage is how it focuses exclusively on the deaths. Don't get me wrong, that's obviously the most serious part, but often we only see the death toll. And there's little discussion of those who were injured or traumatized. How much more damage are we overlooking when we just focus on the people who were killed in the shootings? And the answer, it's sad that we even have to ask the question. I've done this work for the last 5 years, interviewing both survivors and their families. There's a huge impact that goes beyond the bullet wound or the shooting. There are financial implications. There are people that become destitute because they don't have insurance or it doesn't cover the extent of their injuries. That's an important point. Some people have multiple reoccurring surgeries that they're going to have throughout their life. There's not a back to normal for them. This loss is catastrophic. What ends up happening is they grow around the grief. They don't grow out of it. It's the community that suffers. It's the family that suffers. The friends that suffer. The financial implications are very rarely spoken about. People have the misconception that somebody gets shot, then they're going to the hospital, they're getting a couple stitches, and they may move on with their lives. But depending on the kind of bullet, the kind of gun, where it hits you in the body, it can be a complete life changer. There are people that are in this book that will never walk again. We had a gentleman that recently passed away, Kevin, from his wounds that were inflicted upon him years ago. It was just a random shooting coming home from a basketball game. It's way more. There's way more than here's a Band-Aid, move on. People have to live with this every single day of their lives. Their families have to live with it every single day of their lives. Oftentimes the families are the caregivers. Oftentimes the families break apart. There's a huge mental health implication. I don't think that we talk about that as often as what we need to do. That's definitely the case. And an excellent point, and one of the reasons I've been waiting for a while to bring this up to you. next follow-up question here was, we're coming off a particularly brutal July 4th holiday. It was especially bad this year. A lot of cities, including Philadelphia, where I live, the number of people killed was relatively small compared to what we're used to, but the total number of people shot was really high. So we're looking at a lot of survivors. How do you think about the media coverage of these kinds of shootings, where it's more people wounded than murdered? This is bringing to mind for me the coverage of the Mandalay Bay, Las Vegas shooting, where people forget that there were almost 600 people, or maybe even more than 600 people wounded in that. I mean, just raining bullets from essentially a machine gun down on a crowded music festival. An amazing number of people injured in that. And we tend to forget it even happened. People have to be reminded of that shooting. Well, anyway, the answer here for this one, I hate to say it, but I almost expect something to happen now every 4th of July. I certainly do. Somebody is going to get shot and die from that wound. Somebody is going to survive from that wound. Sometimes the people that survived from that wound might run into complications months later and not even realize it. I often wonder where the survivor voices are in all of this. Where is the space that we allow survivors to wrap their minds around it? There will be a press conference or a survivor that's crying and just in complete disarray. It always breaks my heart because I'm thinking about how many other people who have survived the shooting and are watching this. The discussion automatically goes to the debate about the Second Amendment or gun control. These are people. These are our friends, our family, our community. This is the gritty reality these people have to live with for the rest of their lives. There is a huge community of gun violence survivors that they can connect with. But in the moment, people are in such shock. They're often crying, but are not really present, almost still trying to figure out what's going on. Watching this very traumatic response unfold, I wish more people would really see this and really bear witness to this trauma. Are we really caring for the people that are grieving in this catastrophic event? This too brought to mind just things I've read about people who have been survivors of more than one mass shooting, more than one school shooting, kids who experienced a school shooting in middle school or high school and then graduate and go off to college, and then there's a mass shooting at their college campus as well. You know, sometimes they're closely involved, sometimes not, but just knowing that it happened on a campus where you leave the high school campus and go off to college and try to leave that chapter of your life behind, and it happens again, must be incredibly traumatizing. How do you deal with the mental health effects of something like that? How do you count it even? Anyway, another follow-up question then from Amanda. It is absolutely important to mourn the dead, and I don't want to take away from that, but I think the Parkland shooting felt to me like the first time that there was a sustained media attention to the stories of the survivors. The kids themselves made themselves the story. What are your thoughts on Parkland? How did that change the conversation? The answer, it's still amazing what these kids have done. I mean, they're not kids anymore, right? They're adults. It was so important that they're demanding that we know their story is vital. If you're not hearing the story, if we're not bearing witness to the story, then you're saying to me that it did not exist, that we did not exist. There are plenty of other survivor groups, such as that born out of the Columbine community, for example. But I think it's a different time. Parkland survivors had the benefit of social media. But still, you're sharing your story, and there's still a huge vulnerability to that. There will be people who don't take it seriously, or people dismissing it. You're pouring your heart out and sharing the most intimate details of your life. You're hoping that people will connect with it, and you're hoping that the story will change the pattern. There are definitely tons of strides, real changes in legislatures, but it's still not enough. That doesn't mean that we stop sharing our story. We still need people to witness what the aftermath looks like. What Parkland did was open up that dialogue. It really brought together an incredible number of survivors from communities from the 90s and even from the 60s. Survivors of the University of Texas tower shooting came out and told their story. Next question. When we think of survivors of shootings, we think of people who were shot or were there at the shooting. We may even think about the family members of the people who were shot. How do you place other folks that are affected directly? I've interviewed surgeons who work in hospitals, and have had to deal with shooting victims. Firefighters, EMTs, these are also survivors of shootings in the sense that they have to help victims. Where do you put the helpers in the constellation of survivors? And she says, that's a really wonderful question. I definitely think that trauma surgeons or first responders are a group that are not tapped into enough. That's definitely something that I've really been considering for the next project. There are people that gun violence will touch that you don't even think of it. I didn't think that I was going to be as affected as I was doing these projects. Carrying the weight of that story is also going to affect you. Again, certainly, I'll just comment, certainly something I felt after, closing in on a decade of coverage of gun fail stories. It does tend to weigh on you a bit. Although what weighed on me more was, why aren't more people looking at this and giving a crap about what's going on? Why am I the only person that knows these numbers? And then every once in a while, reading a story when a mainstream traditional media outlet would write something about it and research it and say, we had to research this because nobody's tracking these numbers. And then, of course, partially like sigh, I can't believe that still nobody's tracking these numbers. And, of course, partially, what do you mean no one's tracking these numbers? I'm tracking these numbers. How come you can't see this? But, they don't see if you're not in their newsroom. I mean, Reuters might be tracking it. AP don't care. They're not going to see the Reuters, or they're going to pretend not to see the Reuters work anyway. All right, but back to the answer here. Those are the ripple effects of gun violence, the people carrying the weight of these stories, the surgeons, the emergency responders, the ripple effects of gun violence, what we read, what we see, the people that we care for. For me, it brought out a lot of different emotions. Just being scared to go to the places where people that I spoke to were shot or where their children were killed. Being a parent myself, I worry when I drop my child off to school. Am I going to see them again? Gun violence has created a lot of anxiety for a lot of people, millions of people. That's also something that we don't talk about. Being exposed to gun violence, even though you weren't shot, even though you weren't there that day, it touches every aspect of our life, whether we think about it or not. Certainly, I've heard people traumatized because they frequented the places where an infamous mass shooting was perpetrated, even though they weren't there that day. But I could have been. Or even as abstract as, no, there wasn't a mass shooting at my child's school and my child's perfectly safe, but dropping them off at school. This is a school. This could happen. Or God forbid you get some kind of a hoax active shooter alert and there's a lockdown and you got to worry that it could be real this time. Just thinking about this. Or you going into a large gathering, a sports stadium or a nightclub somewhere and thinking it could happen here too. That kind of anxiety it's on a lot of minds. And how do you report on it? Everybody's got it. It's pervasive. It's something that people will learn to ignore, like the pandemic. We all got it. We all got COVID. So who cares? Let's stop thinking about it. I don't know. We do a weird thing to ourselves in that way. Anyway, another follow-up question here. Mass shootings especially are meant to be a public spectacle. The mass shooter picks people at random so that everyone in the community feels like even if they weren't there that day, it could have been them. There we are. It's right here. At this point, we all have a story of someone we know who barely missed a mass shooting. True. In case you were wondering, our own KITM production staff were at Mandalay Bay just a few days before the shooting, and I believe left within 24 hours of the actual shooting. On their way back, there was news that there had been this horrific incident, and she had just been there for a trade show, not days before. Not a very close encounter, but it's the sort of thing that occurs to people. It makes them uneasy and uncomfortable. Right? Okay, so where were we with this? By now, everybody has a story like that. It's a terrifying thing to think about. It gets hard to separate survivor and everyone else. That's our final question here. The answer, whenever a shooting happens, a certain part of the country goes directly towards talking about the Second Amendment. At the same time, I want to say, these are also your people. we're all breathing together. Like this or not, or like this is not, mangling this here, but these are your people. We're all breathing together. Like this is not, this doesn't exclude you. There we go. That's what it actually says. It's a little awkward. Not really a sentence, but an exclamation, you see. Anyway, when she asks, are people going to realize that this is close to home? It's everywhere. There are a ton of emotions that come from that, and it's something that we have to really face. That actually brings us to the conclusion. It was rather lightly edited. It could have rearranged some of the sentences to be more easily read there. But that was just the natural conversation, the way it came out. And a great point, a lot of great points brought up in all of this, something that really needs to be covered and that's still sorely lacking in mainstream media coverage of gun violence of every kind. There's not a single incident of gun violence, mass shootings, individual shootings, accidental shootings, near misses, anything that can't be covered this way, and it doesn't produce this same kind of anxiety anymore. So my thanks then to Amanda Marcotte for covering the book, and my thanks to the authors of the book, and in particular Lauren Kleinman for answering those questions, bringing up those good points. Something I really wanted to share out there with you. Here is a late-breaking story that actually came out on Friday just before we left for vacation. Oh, well, actually, it looks like it came out on Thursday, but I only picked it up on Friday, and then I couldn't fit it on the Friday show, so I wanted to include it in this week's pre-recorded shows. Far-right Twitter influencers first on Elon Musk's monetization scheme. Very interesting, but as someone on Mastodon pointed out, the subheader and headline should be switched. The subheader, the platform is paying high-profile creators, including Andrew Tate, thousands of dollars for posting to the app. Yuck. And who better to break the story than Taylor Lorenz for the Washington Post? All right, or at least, if not break the story, certainly write up the first mainstream traditional media look at it. On Thursday, Twitter announced that it would begin sharing ad revenue with content creators on its platform for the first time, but the offer won't apply to all creators. The first beneficiaries appear to be high-profile far-right influencers who tweeted before the announcement how much they've earned as part of the program. Ian Miles Chong, Benny Johnson, and Ashley St. Clair all touted their earnings. Like so. Wow, Elon Musk wasn't kidding. Content monetization is real, tweeted an anonymous account called End Wokeness with 1.4 million followers, accompanied by a screenshot showing earnings of over $10,400. If only I had been paid back in the day for Twitter posting. Wow. I always knew that such a thing was possible, but of course it meant the company parting with earnings, and so it wasn't likely to occur. But now it has, but only for right-wing weirdos, apparently. So far, many of the influencers who have publicly revealed that they're part of the program are prominent figures on the right. I guess not all, necessarily. And in fact, didn't I see, I thought I saw one of the Krasenstein accounts, likewise touting their payments. But at any rate, first up, Andrew Tate, for example, who was recently released from jail on rape and human trafficking charges, in case you needed somebody you wanted to pay money to, posted that he'd been paid over $20,000 by Twitter. This is a nice turnaround from being banned by Twitter 1.0 for almost 2 years to now being paid to post. Thank you, Elon Musk, tweeted far-right influencer Rogan O'Handley, known as DC Drano. But not all prominent right-wing contributors appeared to be part of the program. When asked if she was part of the program, Chaya Raichik, the creator of Libs of TikTok, offered a tongue-in-cheek response, claiming that her relationship with Musk was thriving. She did not respond to a question about whether she was receiving payments under the program, which sounds like, yes, she is. Anti-Trump influencers Ed Krasenstein and Brian Krasenstein, who were previously banned from Twitter in 2019, also announced that they were a part of the program. Musk did not respond to a request for comment emailed to him at Twitter and at SpaceX, another company he owns. I think there are some conservative content creators who are unhappy, said Chris Ruby, a conservative influencer and president of Ruby Media Group. It doesn't seem even across the board. I don't think the playing field is level. That should drive them crazy, right? She said some on the right who weren't included in the program, despite meeting all the criteria, are venting in private. Most conservatives don't want to go up against the wrath of Elon and what happens when you criticize him. She said, we've seen that he's not really applying the terms of service equally across the board. Twitter claimed in a blog post that the creators' share of advertising revenue would be based on a calculation of replies to their posts and monthly impressions. The program is only available in countries where Stripe, a payment platform, supports payouts, and recipients must pay for Twitter Blue, the platform's monthly subscription service, to be eligible. Not all creators who want to monetize will be able to. Creators who apply to the program will have to pass human review. And there is currently no open application for those interested in joining. Some non-political contributors expressed frustration with the lack of transparency from the company over the rollout of the program. My tweets have generated hundreds of millions of impressions for Twitter every year. Matt Navarra, a social media strategist who runs the tech-focused newsletter and community Geek Out, posted on Thursday. And I've been on the platform for 15 plus years. It's pretty lame. There's no payout coming my way. Twitter has never generated any income directly for the content I have put into it. Former Twitter staffers who worked on creator-focused products expressed skepticism over the rollout, with several calling it a PR stunt. One former Twitter executive who worked on creator partnerships and who asked to remain unnamed to avoid retaliation said that any kind of content monetization we've done in the past was based on a revenue model. This just feels pulled out of thin air for a specific subset of creators that he wanted to placate. I imagine he could have placated them for about 1/4 of what he actually paid them, or even less, actually. Just getting paid at all would have made them happy, I think. So it's remarkable that he's paying them $10,000 and $20,000. I don't know how often, but that's a big payout to just keep them happy. The former Twitter executive also cast doubt on Twitter's revamped metrics, including impressions. The numbers are totally and completely bogus, she said. It's all completely made up. It really feels like they're arbitrarily writing checks to people they like, which is not a sustainable creator strategy. But not out of place in the .com booms of the early 2000s, etc. So who knows? Anyway, Latasha James, a full-time YouTube creator in Detroit, said that Twitter is too volatile for content creators to invest much time in. As a creator, I seek out monetization opportunities with brands and platforms that seem well-funded and stable, she said. Twitter has been the opposite of stable for the past year, so I'd definitely be wary of relying on their monetization program to make a living. Others agreed that even if Musk were to offer every creator a payout, the site's rightward turn would keep them from posting. He's censoring speech that he doesn't like and amplifying speech that he does, and he's picking the people that he wants to have a voice on the platform and silencing others, said Rathbone DuBois, DEBuys. And you probably actually know him. He's a musician and content creator in New Orleans who monetizes on TikTok. It seems like there's no rhyme or reason to it. He's decided arbitrarily that these are the people who are going to make money off the platform because these are his friends. I try to respect my values in my business, and I feel like the things Elon has been doing are not aligned with my values, said Lou Levy, a YouTube creator and digital business coach for content creators. I already get such good monetization on other platforms, especially YouTube. It's just not worth going against what I believe in. The timing of Musk's announcement comes on the heels of Twitter rival Instagram announcing that its Twitter-like app, Threads, has surpassed 100 million signups in under a week, making it the fastest-growing app of all time. Jordan Lintz, owner of High Key Enterprises, a public relations firm, said that he thinks Threads should take a cue from Twitter's new monetization offerings. Threads user retention is going to slip eventually, Lintz said. I think whoever provides the best monetization will win the retention race. It's something Threads might have to look into. Jules Turpak, a content creator and digital culture expert, said that as someone who tweets a lot, the prospect of earning money from posts is appealing, but she's watching to see how Musk will handle thorny issues like content theft and bots. She's also wondering if this new monetization plan is sustainable, given Twitter's struggle to retain advertising revenue. As soon as I'm seeing these amounts, my first question is, how is this going to be sustained? She said. The track record so far with Elon's ownership is that a lot of things that sound very pretty, then you see them in action, and there's these more negative nuances to it. Okay, a little bit of an awkward quote, but at least the piece is over. Okay, we got that on the record. I had some worries about getting that in early, and I ended up restructuring things just so that it wouldn't languish all that long. But I know you know about it already. Just wanted to put it on the record there so that in case we refer back to it at some point, or if by the time I return from vacation it has collapsed in flames, then we won't have to do the background on it. We can just enjoy the roasting. Okay, so you remember I told you that there were 2 Rosalyn MacGregor segments today. Here's the other one. That's about as blunt an introduction as there could be. Take it away again, Rosalyn.
Good morning, David. Today I'd like to bring you even more news of intra-party fighting in the Michigan Republican Party. This article comes from Bridge Magazine and Jonathan Oosting. He writes, the Michigan GOP's ongoing money woes have sparked a feud at the highest levels, with co-chair Melinda Pego challenging recent moves by Chair Kristina Karamo. In a recent email to GOP activists, Pego accuses the Karamo team of failing to share financial information with the party's budget committee. Pego told fellow Republicans she is, quote, not informed nor included, unquote, in a controversial decision by Karamo to remove Budget Committee Chair Matt Johnson, who is an ally of Pego's in Muskegon County GOP politics. The Budget Committee needs to see all the bank statements, Pego wrote in an email obtained by Bridge Magazine. We need to see all amounts of money being fundraised and coming in, and that on a regular basis. Karamo, in a leaked email of her own, accused Republicans of spreading false information about her decision to remove Johnson from the budget post. Quote, it has come to my attention that some within our party are plotting a scheme to demonize me for exercising my authority as state chair of the Michigan Republican Party, Karamo wrote. The escalating feud is the latest example of infighting within the Michigan GOP, which has been reshaped by a grassroots movement loyal to former President Donald Trump that largely removed most establishment Republicans from the party. Citing Pego's email, a longtime Michigan GOP operative wrote on Facebook that members of the party's state committee were plotting a potential no-confidence vote in Karamo. There is zero truth to that claim, another told Bridge Magazine. There is, quote, frustration, unquote, within the party, he acknowledged. He helped arrange a meeting with district chairs to discuss the budget committee dispute. Pego was on the 3-hour call seeking, quote, more transparency and communication. He said, quote, it's stressful in our party. We have a whole new organization. There's limited money. There's limited skill sets and expertise. And on top of it all, the Democrats have a majority in Lansing and they're having their way, unquote. The Michigan GOP has faced significant financial challenges since Karamo took over the party. Karamo has alleged her predecessors left the party in debt and gave her no access to bank accounts, donor lists, and other relevant information needed to perform routine functions. In her recent email to fellow Republicans, Pego said she had opened a new bank account for the Michigan GOP, but that their access had been, quote, removed, denied, and or not yet reinstated, unquote. More than 4 months into Karamo's tenure, the Budget Committee has not received enough information from the administration to craft a budget or make other decisions aside from approving Karamo's salary, Pego alleged. The ousted GOP budget chair said the budget committee he had led sought to implement, quote, responsible spending limits given, quote, extremely meager, unquote, fundraising, but was met with, quote, adamant opposition from Chair Karamo and the small circle of operatives around her. As one of the many people who have been won over with the inspiring vision Chair Karamo gave us in her speeches, I am profoundly disappointed, he continued. I know the Republican Party has lost the trust of many, and I'm sorry to see more of the same when we can do so much better, unquote. In her own email to GOP activists, Karamo defended her decision to remove Johnson from the Budget Committee. She accused him of, quote, non-action and slow action on critical items and a leak of sensitive committee information, unquote, along with communication and leadership failures. Karamo also lamented the feud itself, urging Republicans to instead focus on the upcoming 2024 election cycle, which will feature a presidential contest, state house races, and will likely be a fierce battle for a U.S. Senate seat, opening up with the pending retirement of Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow. What should be a simple inter-party matter is now spilling beyond that, Karamo wrote, which will cause further division within our party. That's my time. I'm your Michigan correspondent signing off. Back to you, David.
All right. Thank you again, Rosalyn. Here's a nice development that I'm pleased to share with you. I find it via SpectrumLocalNews.com. What is Spectrum Local News? Spectrum News 1. Up in the upper right-hand corner, it tells me it's giving me the temperature of Harlingen, Texas. It's 97 degrees as I look at this. So you probably have bigger problems than my pronunciation of your town name. But anyway, it's an AP story. So we know the origin of it anyway. And this, an interesting new development as far as I have seen, but not surprising, but pleasing nonetheless. January 6th rioters are raking in thousands in donations. That's the bad part. The good part is now the U.S. is coming after their haul. I kind of like that news. Less than 2 months after he pleaded guilty to storming the U.S. Capitol, Texas resident Daniel Goodwin appeared on Tucker Carlson's then Fox News show and promoted a website where supporters could donate money to Goodwin and other rioters, whom the site called political prisoners. The Justice Department now wants Goodwin to give up more than $25,000 he raised, a clawback that is part of a growing effort by the government to prevent rioters from being able to personally profit from participating in the attack that shook the foundations of American democracy. A lot of good alliteration in that sentence. Personally profit from participating. Very nice. An Associated Press review of court records shows that prosecutors in the more than 1,000 criminal cases from January 6th are increasingly asking judges to impose fines on top of prison sentences to offset donations from supporters of the Capitol rioters. Dozens of defendants have set up online fundraising appeals to help or for help with legal fees, and prosecutors acknowledge there's nothing wrong with asking for help for attorneys' expenses, but the Justice Department has, in some cases, questioned where the money is really going because many of those charged have had government-funded legal representation. The sort of thing that would ordinarily make people like that scream that someone was defrauding the government, of course, if that someone was someone else. Even more to the point, if that someone was someone else and, maybe a different skin color than them. Anyway, yes, so most of the fundraising efforts appear on Give, Send, Go, which bills itself as the #1 free Christian fundraising site and has become a haven for January 6th defendants barred from using mainstream crowdfunding sites, including GoFundMe, to raise money. The rioters often proclaim their innocence and portray themselves as victims of government oppression, even as they cut deals to plead guilty and cooperate with prosecutors. And, by the way, just to reiterate the point from the last paragraph, they are victims of government oppression even as they avail themselves of free representation courtesy of the government. Their fundraising success suggests that many people in the United States still view January 6th rioters as patriots and cling to the baseless belief that Democrats stole the 2020 presidential election from Donald Trump. The former president himself has fueled that idea, pledging to pardon rioters if he is elected. Marcus Maley, a Virginia man scheduled to be sentenced next month for assaulting police at the Capitol, raised more than $16,000 from an online campaign that described him as a, quote, January 6th POW, and asked for money for his family. Sure, how about some money for my family, too? Come on in. Prosecutors have requested a $16,000 plus fine, noting that Maley had a public defender and did not owe any legal fees. He should not be able to use his own notoriety gained in the commission of his crimes to capitalize on his participation in the capital, get it, breach in this way, the prosecutor wrote in court papers. So far this year, prosecutors have sought more than $390,000 in fines against at least 21 riot defendants in amounts ranging from $450 to more than $71,000, according to the AP's tally. Judges have imposed at least $124,127 in fines against 33 riot defendants this year. In the previous 2 years, judges ordered more than 100 riot defendants to collectively pay more than $240,000 in fines. Separately, judges have ordered hundreds of convicted rioters to pay more than $524,000 in restitution to the government to cover more than $2.8 million in damage to the Capitol and other January 6th related expenses. They should be paying for the psychiatric care of the cops and others trapped in the building whom they terrorized, but we'll take what we can get. More rioters facing the most serious charges and longest prison terms are now being sentenced. They tend to also be prolific fundraisers, which could help explain the recent surge in fines requests. Earlier this month, the judge who sentenced Nathaniel DeGrave to more than 3 years in prison also ordered him to pay a $25,000 fine. Prosecutors noted that the Nevada resident, incredibly, raised over $120,000 in Give, Send, Go fundraising campaigns that referred to him as Beijing Biden's political prisoner in America's Gitmo. He did this despite seeking to cooperate with the government and admitting he and his co-conspirators were guilty since at least November of 2021, a prosecutor wrote. Lawyer William Shipley, who has represented DeGrave and more than 24 other January 6 defendants, said he advises clients to avoid raising money under the auspices of being a political prisoner if they intend to plead guilty. Until they admit they committed a crime, they're perfectly entitled to shout from the rooftops that the only reason they're being held is because of politics, Shipley said. It's just First Amendment political speech. Shipley said he provided the judge with documentation showing that DeGrave raised approximately $25,000 more than what he paid his lawyers. I've never had to do it until these cases because I've never had clients that had third-party fundraising like this, Shipley said. There's a segment of the population that is sympathetic toward the plight of these defendants. Give, Send, Go co-founder Heather Wilson said her site's decision to allow legal defense funds for Capitol riot defendants, quote, is rooted in our society's commitment to the presumption of innocence and the freedom for all individuals to hire private attorneys. The government's push for more fines comes as it reaches a milestone in the largest federal investigation in American history. Just over 500 defendants have been sentenced for January 6th crimes. Judges aren't rubber stamping prosecutors' fine requests, by the way. Prosecutors sought more than $70,000 in fines for Peter Schwartz, a Kentucky man who attacked police officers outside the Capitol with pepper spray and a chair. Makeshift weaponry, if I ever heard it. U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta sentenced Schwartz this month to more than 14 years in prison, one of the longest so far in a Capitol riot case, but didn't impose a fine. Prosecutors suspect Schwartz tried to profit from his fundraising campaign, Patriot Pete Political Prisoner in D.C. More alliteration, but I'm not so pleased with it this time. But his lawyer, Dennis Boyle, said there is no evidence of that. No evidence of what? Trying to profit? If there's a Patriot Pete Political Prisoner in D.C. page, that's the evidence. Otherwise, why that alliterative title? Where did that come from? Is that not evidence of something? The judge basically said that if the money was being used for attorney's fees or other costs like that, then there was no basis for a fine. Boyle said, I see what you mean. A jury convicted romance novel cover model John Strand. That's an all-American, hardworking USA patriot kind of a occupation. He was convicted of storming the Capitol with Dr. Simone Gold, a California physician who was a leading figure in the anti-vaccine movement. Now prosecutors are seeking a $50,000 fine on top of a prison term for Strand when a judge sentences him on Thursday. What's the date of this article, by the way? Okay, it's actually quite a bit older. It's one of the oldest ones that I dug up for this. So most of this action has taken place already, and you could go and look up and see what sentences and or fines were imposed in these cases. This is a May 28th, 2023 article. So a lot of these things that were pending sentencing are already done now. Strand has raised more than $17,300 for his legal defense without disclosing that he has a taxpayer-funded lawyer, according to prosecutors. They say Strand appears to have substantial financial means, living in a home that was purchased for more than $3 million last year. Strand has raised and continues to raise money on his website based on his false statements and misrepresentations of the events of January 6th, prosecutors wrote. Goodwin, who appeared on Carlson's show in March, is scheduled to be sentenced next month, which would have been now last month. Defense lawyer Carolyn Stewart described prosecutors as demanding blood from a stone, asking for the $25,000 fine. He received that amount in charity to help him in his debt for legal fees for former attorneys, and this, for unknown reasons, is bothersome to the government, Stewart wrote. Yeah, well, for some reason it would normally be bothersome to these people if anyone else was getting that money, so I don't have a great deal of sympathy. Just thought I'd share that story with you and wind up on a happy note. I mean, it'd be happier if we did this research and it turns out that they were really getting clocked with some serious fines. Go and check that out, why don't you? And let us know what you find.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
That wraps it up for today. We got a rerun coming for you tomorrow. Back on Wednesday with another 1-hour special show with brand new material. We will see you then.